Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. Respected brothers and sisters, today, alhamdulillah, we are continuing in our Tuhfa course, and we're now starting the next chapter, which is titled Fil Mithlaini wal Mutaqarribaini wal Mutajanisaini. So the term al-mithlaini means the two identical, so that's referring to the same two letters. And al-mutaqarribaini refers to two letters that are close. And al-mutajanisaini refers to two similar letters. So we'll differentiate between those two in detail now, inshallah. And as I said in our previous session, there are not any particular rules to learn here in this chapter, with the exceptions that I will point out, inshallah. But rather, what we need to take from this chapter is just understanding a lot of the terminology. So, understanding these terms and understanding the relationship of the letters to one another. And again, there are applications that we apply when we read certain letters when they come before or after one another. And those are mentioned here in this chapter. But again, usually this chapter we approach it with understanding the terminology and the context, the lines as well, and then highlighting again those particular rules that we read specifically for Hafs and Asim. Okay, so again, this chapter deals with the letters and how they relate to one another in regards to the places of articulation, al-makharij, and the sifat, so the characteristic of the letters when they meet. So what do we mean by when they meet? It means when one letter immediately follows another letter. So there are four terms that we use to describe this meeting of the letters, which is they're classified according to how distant or close they are to one another in the places of articulation and characteristics. So we'll go ahead and discuss each of those terms and how they are classified according to the four types. So if you noticed the title, the chapter heading on this particular subject, only Jamzuri gave 3 terms. But I've added the fourth term in the explanation here, which is al-mutaba'idaini. Okay, so al-mutaba'idaini means two letters that are far away from each other. So it's just referring to any two letters that are not near to one another in their place of articulation or in their characteristics. And there are many examples of this type. But the rule that one applies with regards to these letters is idhar. And Al-Jamzuri most likely didn't mention al-mutaba'idaini because it is known that this rule is only idhar. And again, there are so many examples. So we'll go ahead now. We will define each term first, and then we'll list the 3 types. So the first type, it's the easiest to remember. This is al-mithlaini. So again, that is referring to 2 identical letters, meaning the same 2 letters. And in the language, this is obviously the strongest and closest relationship that any 2 letters can have because it's referring to the exact 2 same letters. So obviously they agree in both makharij and sifat. And the rules of how these letters are pronounced apply whether the letters occur in the same word or in between 2 words, because there are some differences. So that's just important to note. So for mithlaini, the same 2 letters, the rules are the same whether the letters are in the same word or again in between 2 words. And a footnote that I put in for this text, and again, you might have students who come into this course and they haven't studied the makharij and the sifat. And maybe that they are a fluent reciter or they're still learning and they want to take the course for a quicker way of learning the rules of tajweed. So this chapter can seem a bit daunting to them. Even for fluent readers who haven't studied the makharij and sifat, these terms can be completely new, or they might have heard about them or briefly read about them. So, this is why I say in the footnote, although great effort has been made in this chapter to simplify the terms in relationship to the letters and their types, a student who has not yet studied the makharij, right, the places of articulation, and the sifat, the characteristics of the letters, they might not fully understand this chapter. I know as well in other books on tajweed, you might see al-mutamathilaini instead of al-mithlaini. And it's the same thing. It's the same thing. It's just another way of expressing that relationship. So again, under each three types, you'll have three types. So we have mithlaini, mutaqaribaini, and mutajanisaini. So under each of those, there are three. And they're all three the same terms, but there are some differences. And so what's coming in the next few pages can be a bit text heavy, but then at the end of this chapter, there's a really simple diagram. And if you stick to that, that is your visual and that's very clear. What I've done here is just explained that. So under Mithlaini, the first type we have is Saghir. So Saghir means the minor, and it's called as such because the first letter is sakin, again, without a harakat, and the second letter is mutaharrik, so having a fatha, kasra, or dhamma. So the example that I've chosen here is with the letter ba. So again, we see here at the bottom of the page, اضرب بعصاك. So we have the first ba in the Mus'haf. You will find it in the Mus'haf from the Gulf. Again, I always highlight those differences so that one is aware without the sukoon. In other Musahif, you will find the sukoon because you will find the original state of the word has been presented for the reader. So that first letter is without its sakin, whether the sukoon is written or not, and the second is mutaharrik. So obviously the application that we make here is idgham. So we have a complete assimilation, idgham camel. And the other indicator, visual indicator, one will recognize and should understand is that the second letter will have a shadda. So as we've already stated in Arabic, the rule is that a word can never start with a shadda, because if we break apart the shadda, we understand that a sukoon is present and that's followed by a harakat. So they put that there to tell the reader to make idgham. So we have saghir, where we make idgham. So the second term under this mithlaini is kabir. So kabir in tajweed terminology, it means the major. And it means that both the first and the second letter is mutaharrik. And again, this type is said with idhar. And again, in general, we're speaking about the rules across the board, but specifically for Hafs and Asim. But when we start to study the qira'at, you will find, for example, one of our rawis, Susi, he makes idgham kabir. So that's something that seems a bit strange when you start reciting according to his reading, but that's usually just strange because we've learnt that according to Hafs and Asim, that we always read idhar with this particular rule. And that's obviously again because both of the letters are with a harakat. So the example I gave here is when the first ha again is with harakat, with kasra, and the second is with dhamma. So you can see here, fihi huda, fihi huda. So when we go to study our different readings, as I said, you will find Susi, he will make idgham kabir here. So he would say fihi huda, fi huda, and he can extend that fi huda. So just to be aware of that change. So then the third term is mutlaq. So mutlaq is the opposite of saghir, and it means absolute. It's called absolute because the first letter is mutaharrik and the second letter is sakin. And this type again is said with idhar. So we have our perfect example here in the word shaqaqana. So we read it as it is. And something else to keep in mind, along with Al-Jamzuri not mentioning the term al-mutaba'idaini, he also didn't mention the term mutlaq in his poem. But again, because it's used within the science of tajweed, I have included it here. And this type does not have a rule other than idhar, other than idhar. And like al-mutaba'idaini, all of the narrators, including Hafs, there is not much particular attention given to this rule. They mainly focus on the saghir and the kabir because that's where you're going to see the changes with the readers. So just to be aware of that. So again, that completes Mithlani. We're just speaking about the two same letters. So then the second term is al-mutaqaribaini. So what does that mean in Arabic? So if we say something or two things because the ya and the noon on the end of the word al-mutaqaribaini refers to the dual. So we're speaking of two things that are close to one another. And in this case, we're speaking about the close relationship between two different letters. And again, this is not as strong or close as al-mithlaini, because although the two letters are close to one another in their makhraj, they have different characteristics. So the rules of how these letters are pronounced, they apply again, whether the letters occur in the same word or in between two words. And what's important under this type is that al-mutaqarribaini is said with clearness under all three types. So again, if we look at the first term, saghir, we said it's minor, where the first letter is sakin and the second letter is mutaharrik. So the two letters that I've demonstrated this with are the letters dal and sin. So if you were oftentimes in what we do with our students when we're teaching them the proper place of articulation for the letters is that we put a hamza before the letter with any harikat, and then we put that particular letter after with a sukoon. So if you say ad and as, you will find the tan as it goes up where it touches that it's very close. They are very close to one another. There's just a small space in between the two letters in their makhraj. So we use the tip of the tongue, but we know rather that the characteristic al-hams, which is the whispering, and al-hams in the tajweed terminology, it means that we exhale the air. So as the air is exhaling, it continues as the letter is being pronounced. But with the letter dal, it has that characteristic of jahar. So jahar means the apparent. and the exhalation of the air stops as the letter is pronounced. And that's why it has to be said with qalqala, because if not, then the letter isn't clearly brought forth. So, because they have the distance and the difference of these characteristics, al-hams, if you study the sifat, you will find al-hams is the opposite of al-jahr. So because of that, both letters are said with idhar. So the example that I have here is قَدْ سَمِعَ اللَّهُ. So with complete clearness. So under this type, the general rule is idhar, except for 4 cases. And in those 4 cases, we will make idgham. And students sometimes say, how can I remember those particular 4 cases? Well, I tell them that the script, of course, if one doesn't remember those particular cases, the script of the Mus'haf will help you. Because, again, that first letter will not have a mark over it, and the letter that immediately follows it will have shadda. So the 4 cases that we have, number 1 is the letter lam into ra. So this is where we're going to make a complete assimilation, idgham camel. So we make a complete assimilation and the letter lam is not pronounced. And one will go straight from the letter ba in our example here to the fatha on the letter ra. So ba rafa'a. So this is the first exception. And then our second exception, and again the script accommodates that, is with the letter qaf into kaf. Again, we're going to make a complete assimilation. So the letter qaf is not pronounced, and we go straight from the letter lam to the dhamma on the letter kaf. Alam nakhluqkum. Then the third example, if we go back to our chapter on the rules, حكم لام al ولام الفعل, we are now with the third exception talking about the lam shamsiya. We're talking about the lam shamsiya. So we know with the lam that we are going to assimilate that into 13 of the 14 letters of the group of the lam shamsiya. The only exception to that, and again, recall that we're speaking about the al that comes on a noun that brings it into the state of being definite, of being known. So the only exception to this is the 14th letter, which is the letter lam. Because when 2 identical letters are assimilated, then they will fall under mithlaini. Like the word allel. So this is a letter shamsiya, but it also falls under the term mithlaini because we're merging that first lam into the second lam. And then the fourth exception is when the letter noon is second, and then it comes before the letters of yarmaluna. So again, we go back to our chapter of a noon sakina and tanween. So we already know this rule. We already know the rule of al, but now in this chapter, we're just defining it. Because remember, subhanAllah, our deen is very blessed in the sense that we have the scholars who take into account every single detail down to each letter, each mark of each letter, each classification of the letters. So such great care and detail has been presented in that mushaf that we now read from. Every position of the harakats, every shape, even the spacing, there's so much there that we don't see or reflect on or think about. And I want all of us to get into that mindset and think about the efforts that have been put there to facilitate the reading. Okay, so now we've done the four exceptions. So now under Kabir, we already know that both the first and the second letter are mutaharrik. So the example that I gave here in this chapter is with the two letters dal and dal. Again, if you say ad and ad, ad, you will find them close in place of articulation. Again, we're using the tip of the tongue, but they are different in their characteristics. So again, dal has the strength of shadda, hence the reason one needs to make qalqala. And the strength, this is what we term this, this is how we describe this characteristic. So it's those letters that are pronounced with force as the flow of sound comes trapped in the place of articulation. So if you don't bounce or shake that place of articulation, then the sound will not come forth. You would, as we say, eat the letter. So if you said ad, you can hardly detect the sound of dal, hence the reason for the need of qalqala, ad. But then we have dal on the other hand, it's pronounced with what we call arrakhawa, which is the softness. So it's a term that we use to describe those letters that are pronounced softly, because during their pronunciation, the flow of the sound of the letter continues. So again, because of the distance and the difference of these characteristics, again, shadda being the opposite of rakhawa, if one studies the sifat of the letters, we apply idhar. We apply idhar. So the example we have from Surah Al-Baqarah, بَعْدِ ذَلِكَ. So again, the script takes that into account. And what I say for my students here is that we can look at every single letter that follows and we can compare all of the letters. And if you were to do that, even just with this particular line, you could see that the majority of the letters here, for example, we have al-mutabaidaini, which would be mentioned a lot. And then we have the example of al-mutaqaribaini. So we could analyze every single letter in every single ayah and classify them according to those four terms. Okay, now if we go into the last term for mutaqaribaini, again, we said this means absolute. So you have that first letter being mutaharrik and the second sakin. Again, the opposite of saghir. So the example I gave here is with the letters nun and lam. So again, if one says al, and you will find your tongue just slightly shifts during the place of articulation. So lam has the characteristic of al-istifal. Al-istifal means that it means what's going to happen is that your tongue will become flattened to the floor of the mouth, so your tongue will lower. So the letter is pronounced with a light sound. But with the letter noon, it has the characteristic al-infitah. So al-infitah, it means the openness. It means the openness, where the mouth is open as the tongue separates from the roof of the mouth to pronounce the letter. So this example from Surah Al-Qasas, falan, falan. So the only application here is idhar. So again, the idea to remember with mutaqaribaini is that it refers to two different letters close to one another in their makhraj, but differ in their sifat. So we covered al-muthlaini, we covered al-mutaqaribaini, now al-mutajanisaini. Yes, Nahida. إظهار متقربين صغير. So now the last term under al-mutaqarribaini is al-mutajanisaini. Again, similar. This means what? It means that these two letters share the same place of articulation, but they differ in their characteristics. So remember al-mutaqarribaini, they are close to one another in articulation, but difference in characteristics. Here with mutajanisaini, we call them the two similar because same place of articulation, but different makharij. So again, we're looking at the relationship of the letters. So this is a close relationship between the two letters, but weaker than al-mithlaini, but stronger than al-mutaqaribaini. And it's stronger because the letters share the same place of articulation. And just like the previous two, the rules apply whether the letters occur in the same word or in between two words. So we have a few exceptions here with mutajanisaini under the term saghir. So keeping in mind, first letter is sakin, second letter is mutaharrik. So under this type, we have both idhar and idgham, and a case of ikhfa as well. So idhar is the general rule. Idhar is the general rule. And there is the exception of 7 cases by idgham and the 1 case by ikhfa. So in the case of idgham, again, that first letter will not have a mark on it, while the letter immediately following it has shadda. And again, we tend not to really think about this when we're reading because the script is already there for us. So in the case of ikhfa, we will have no mark over the first letter, and the letter immediately following it will be mutaharrik. So regarding the letters that are said with idgham, again, they occur one after the other. It's those examples where we find a dal into a tha into dal, a dal into a dha, a dal into a ta into a dal, and then a ta into ta into ta, and ba into bi. And again, you might say, how will I remember these 7 exceptions? It's not necessary that you memorize them. It's necessary that you understand that those exceptions are there and you've read them and you haven't probably thought of them because again, the script is accommodating. But I did give 2 examples here. The first is from Surah Al-Fatiha with the letters Mim and Waw, and both of them are said with idhar. So these 2 letters obviously share the same place of articulation, the lips, but they differ in their characteristics. So we say about the letter Mim that it's said with a tawassut, which is to pronounce the letter in between 2 characteristics. Those are the characteristics of rakhawa, which we said meant softness, and ashidda, meaning the strength. So it's pronounced with moderation, a tawassut. As the sound partially emerges and does not flow completely, as in rakhawa, while the waw is pronounced with rikhawa. So we have alayhim wala. The second example that I give for the students here in the text is from Surah Al-Ali Imran. So here is our example of making idgham. So you can see we have a ta being assimilated into the letter ba. So again, these 2 letters, if you say up and at, you will see that they share the same place of articulation, the tan, but ta has the characteristic of al-hams, the whispering again. So that's where the exhalation of air continues as the letter is being pronounced. But with the letter ta, again, which is why we have to apply qalqala, it has the characteristic of al-jahr. So that's where the exhalation of the air stops as we are pronouncing the letter. What the طائفة. And then the last example that I give is from Surah Hud, where we have the letter ba into mim, and it's said with idgham. So the letter ba is completely assimilated and is not pronounced. So one goes directly from the letter kaf to the letter mim. And I think most students of Tajweed have been taught this particular example here. Irkam ma'ana. Got a bit of a stuffed nose, sister, so my reading is a little bit, sounds maybe a little bit congested today, alhamdulillah. The example then, we said that there is one example of ikhfa, and that is where we have the meme coming before the letter ba from Surah Al-Fil. So again, tarmihim bihijara. So that's quite a lengthy discussion under Saghir, but those are the exceptions and the rules. Now with Kabir, again, meaning both letters are mutaharrika, we have the rule idhar. We have the rule idhar. The example is from Surah An-Nisa. And both of the letters here, you can see Maryama, Buhtana. Both letters are mutaharrik, and both letters share that same place of articulation. But ba, again, a letter of qalqala is said with shidda, with strength, to bring forth the sound. Again, because the force as the flow of sound becomes trapped in the place of articulation. So the letter needs to be said with strength. And then the meme, again, as we said, has a tawassut. So it has moderation. So that sound is partially emerging and does not flow completely. And then the last term, mutlaq. So mutlaq, we said, means absolute. First letter is mutaharrik, second is sakin. So under this, again, the rule is idhar. So the two letters that I've given in this particular example are the letters dal and ta. Again, ad, at, ad, at. You find your tongue in the same place. And if it isn't, then you obviously need to work on makharij, as we all do need from time to time. So both are articulated using the tip of the tongue, but again, different characteristics. Ta has al-hams, right? So this particular letter is voiced low and weak. And during the pronunciation, the exhalation of air continues, whereas dal again has that characteristic of al-jahr, the apparent. So we have to apply qalqala, the opposite of al-hams. And these letters need to be voiced high and strong because during their pronunciation, the exhalation of air stops. So the example here is from Surah Shu'ara. So we have إذ تدعون. إذ تدعون. So the idea to remember with Mutajaniseni, the same, two different letters that share the same place of articulation, but they differ in their characteristics. Now, as I said at the start of the lesson, there's quite a lot, it's quite text heavy, this chapter. And students read through all of that and they think, oh, how will I remember all of this? مثلين متقربين متجانسين. And then the terms صغير, kabir, mutlaq, and then there are some differences. But what helps is the chart. So I'll just zoom out here a little bit. So for those of you that have the book with you, you can just see here al-mithlaini, al-mutaqarribaini, al-mutajanisani. So you will find here under مثلين صغير, the rule is إدغام. Under متقاربين, the rule is صغير and the rule is إظهار. Under متجانسين, there were those exceptions. So we had إظهار, إدغام, and إخفاء. If you look to the remaining كبير for مثلين متقاربين متجانسين, the rule is إظهار across the board. إظهار, إظهار. If you look to مطلق, إظهار, إظهار, إظهار. So again, this is dealing with the relationship of the letters. And yes, there are rules there how to read, but it's describing the relationship of the letters. It's describing that relationship of the letters. So what we'll go ahead and do now is we'll jump right into our lines for this lesson. So line 30, إن في الصفات والمخارج اتفق حرفان فالمثلان فيهما أحق. So إن في الصفات والمخارج. So when in the characteristics and the makharij, اتفق. اتفق means that they agreed. So when the makhraj and the sifat agree, what's agreeing? Harfani, two letters. فالمثلين. So they are called مثلين, meaning the identical. فيهما أحق. So أحق here means that they are deserving to be called مثلين. They are deserving to be called مثلين. And then line 31, he says, وَإِنْ يَكُونَ مَخْرَجًا تَقَارَبًا وَفِي الصِّفَةِ اخْتَلَفًا يُلَقَّبًا. And in وَإِنْ يَكُونَ مَخْرَجًا تَقَارَبًا. So when the two letters يَكُونَ, the alif on the end is for the dual because we're again speaking of two letters. So when they are in place of articulation, makhraj taqarraba. So when they are close, again, the alif is referring to the two letters. وفي الصفات, and in their characteristics, اختلفا, they differed. Again, the alif on the end referring to the two letters. يلقبا, so they are called. Again, the alif on the end, the dual form. Because it's important, sisters. Many of us are not native Arabic speakers like myself. I cannot teach spoken Arabic. I only read an Arabic book for my qira'at. But I studied Fusha and I studied it in depth grammatically, and that has helped me along the way. Many want to learn Arabic as myself. We want to be fluent. We want to speak. We want to be able to read the classical text in the language, but we sometimes don't have the supporting environment for that. So I always say for my students, at least try to have some level of Arabic. You'll be surprised at, how well you can, especially if your intention is there. If your intention is there that you are doing this for the sake of Allah and for the sake of acquiring ilm, that you will have enough of the language that you will be able to, for example, navigate these texts, right? You'll understand when you look at this line that all those alifs at the end refer to the dual form of the word. And you'll have some knowledge about verbs, and you'll grow your knowledge base. You'll grow your knowledge base. I teach Fusha, I teach the grammar part, I teach the reading. I have a lot of vocabulary, and that has helped me in my comprehension of the Quran and the qira'at, although I cannot speak the language. And if I were to sit with an Arabic book, it would obviously take me a great deal longer than one in my native English tongue. So I studied the books, the Medina Arabic books. There are only three for the adults. If you finish the first two, that would suffice you. That would suffice you. Book three would help strengthen your grammatical analysis, your understanding of the words. So try to make those efforts so that when you study the qira'at, you'll understand that having that extra knowledge of the Arabic language will facilitate your understanding and why you're reading the way that you do. And of course, for the tafsir as well. So back to the line, he says, yuqallaba. So they are called, and he continues that into line 32. They are called متقاربين أو يكون اتفقا في مخرج دون الصفة حققا. So they are called متقاربين. They are called close or proximate. Then, right immediately after that, he goes on to describe al-mutajanisayni. So he says, oh, or yakuna tafaqa. Or if, again, there's the dual form, if the two letters agree fi makhrajin in their place of articulation, duna sifati, duna without the characteristics, hukliqa, then they have been fulfilled. They have been fulfilled as being called, and he completes that in line 33. بالمتجانسين ثم إن سكن أول كل فالصغير سميا. They are called the two similar. Then he continues to describe the two terms that he gives in his text. So he says here, ثم إن سكن, then when the first أول كل, so when the first of each letter, and he's referring back to the three groups, المثلين, المتقاربين, and المتجانسين, is without a vowel, so they are what? فالصغيرة. So they are minor. سميا. سميا here means, so name them. So name them the minor. And then line 34, he describes the term kabir. And remember, he didn't mention the term mutlaq. So line 34, he says, أو حرك الحرفان في كل فقل كل كبير وافهمنه بالمثول أو حرك. Or if the al-harfani, if the two letters are with a harakat, في كل, in each of the three groups, again, مثلين متقاربين متجانسين فقول. So here's a command verb. So say كل كبير. Each of them is major. And then he says وافهم منه بالمثول, and understand them بالمثول. Understand them with or by examples. With or by examples. So again, you have the word for word translation. And then you have no homework for this particular chapter, because the only suitable homework that I could think of, which would be quite tedious and not really necessary, is, to take one particular ayah and then describe each letter as it comes after the other, which would be quite time consuming. And it's not necessary. So you only have the imtihan, and these are the questions that will be on the ijaza. So very simple. What does the term mithlaini refer to? The two same identical letters. They share the same makhraj and the same sifat. The term mutaqaribaini, what does it refer to? Two letters that are close in makhraj, but they differ in their characteristics. What does the term mithlaini refer to? Again, very simple and straightforward questions to show that you comprehend. Mutajanisayni, they're the two similar. We call them the two similar because they share the same place of articulation, but they differ in their characteristics. And then the last question, define the terms. So what does saghir mean? It means minor, because the first letter is sakin, the second letter is mutaharrik. Kabir means the major, because both letters are mutaharrik. And mutlaq, although Jamzuri didn't mention it, it refers to the first letter being mutaharrik and the second being sakin, and it's the opposite of saghir. So that completes this particular chapter. And then we start heading into our last rule, which are the rules of the med. And before that, we'll just take a look at the categories. We'll just take a look at the categories, inshallah. So we only have 4 chapters left, alhamdulillah. The first 3 focusing on the categories of the med and the rules of the med. And then we discuss the rules of med lazim. And then you have the conclusion. So what I will go ahead and do now is stop the recording. For those of you who would like to read the lines for this section, you can do so. And if you have any lines that you've memorized as well, that you just want to read in general, we can do that also, inshallah. And then we will continue Wednesday, inshallah. We will start in on the next chapter, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.